Connor, what is up, my friend? Great to see you again.
Yes, sir. Good to be back and good to see you as well.
I enjoy our conversations because although you and I are in the same space, we're both trying to serve men and help men recapture their masculinity. I think we generally come at it from a different angle. And I don't always see it the same way as you, but I'm open and receptive to it, which is it's actually something I can't say has always been the case. There's a couple of terms that you use that I used to cringe over. And and I'll tell you what those terms are here in a minute. And now I'm kind of like, no, that actually makes sense now that I hear the context and we've had a lot more conversations. So the two words, men's work, which is the title of your book. So
Boom.
I've cringed at that phrase for a while, not
Yeah.
just from you. And then the other one is shadow work or
Mm,
something along those lines. And I want to dive into that today because the more
cool.
I experience some things in my own personal life, the more I see that you're right and the more value I get from the message that you share.
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that deeply. That's I get it. I mean, I honestly grappled with calling my book men's work for a number of reasons. Mostly because in some ways it encompasses a kind of genre or whatever you want to call it, a movement or a kind of a type of work. But also it's a little cliche. So yeah, I
What
definitely had some hesitation.
what specifically was the hesitation? Do you feel like it had a negative connotation, or would be misunderstood, or was there something else that you were worried about there?
Yeah, honestly, a little bit of both. I think first off, I think anytime that how do I want to say this? Men don't generally want advice unless we're in crisis. Like I don't want another man telling me what to do or how I should be living unless I'm like in full crisis mode,
Mm.
where I'm just like I can't like my stuff's a mess and I don't know what to do. And then I want another man that I trust and respect to sort of step in and say like, okay, get your head on straight, pick yourself up. This is the direction that you should move in. So I hesitated calling it men's work because I didn't want men to think that the book was going to be about me telling them how they should live their lives. That was number
Mm.
one. Um, because I don't know how another man should live his life. That's for him to discern and decide. So that was one of the first pieces that I was a little concerned about. The second piece is that there is this kind of whatever you want to call it, this move online, on Instagram, on YouTube, on whatever, of men doing some form of work, whether it's a therapeutic style of work, whether it's a rekindling and reconnecting with their own masculine core type of work. But there's men doing some form of work to better themselves. And I hesitated because I didn't want to own a genre, right? To sort of like claim this sort of like space or this term as my own, because there's many different types of it. There's
Mm.
men that are doing work that is much more spiritual. There's men that are doing work that is reconnecting them to land and hunting. So it can come under many different umbrellas, and I didn't want to sort of try and claim it as my own. But there also is this big push for men to quote unquote do the work,
Right.
and that's predominantly coming from women. But I think that a lot of men are starting to ask the question, what's the work that I need to do to better myself as a man? What's the work that I need to do to better myself as a husband, as a father, as a leader, as a lover, whatever that looks like? And so I wanted to give something practical and tactical that could guide them on that path if that's what they were looking to do.
Yeah, and work is such a great, it's not the word itself, but the meaning behind it. I think men are attracted to work, right? We're
Yeah.
attracted to toil, we're attracted to labor, we're attracted to exerting our will against something towards something meaningful. And that's what work is. I guess the negative connotation for me in the past, and again, I'm more open and receptive to this, especially your messaging and than I have been in the past, is that I just imagined that it's this therapeutic session, sitting down with some PhD and talking about your feelings, or a bunch of dudes sitting together. We were talking about Costa Rica and Hawaii earlier, a bunch
Right.
of dudes sitting together in this like hippie, like
Commune.
feeling commune or Airbnb, like holding hands, wearing weird shit, singing kumbaya about how great each other are. And it was like repulsive to me. And I
Uh-huh.
know that's not your message. So I
Yeah.
don't want guys to feel that way, but that's
Yeah.
just how it came across because I saw a lot of that in the past.
Well, I get it, man. And I think you nailed the other thing that I didn't articulate, which was my concern, which is that that does exist. That exists out there, and I mean, I've heard stories of guys, going to a weekend or something like that and having those types of experiences. And, the work that I put forward is always from the space of how do you turn towards yourself as a man and learn and sort of plumb the depths of who you actually are to understand yourself more effectively so that you can get the most out of yourself, so that you can direct yourself towards your greatest aims, so that you can lead your family more effectively. And we are often the thing standing in our own way. And that's the real truth for the majority of men within our modern culture, is that we are the ones standing in our own way. And men's work is, I think, my definition of it is supposed to be a path that we can walk. And again, there's many different versions of it, but a path that we can walk to reconnect to who we are at our core, and what we are what's possible within us, what we're capable of. And I think that that's something that's very appealing. The more that I've worked with men over the past decade from all over the world, it's like we want to see what we're capable of physically, mentally, sexually, emotionally, financially, and that there's merit in that. There's merit in that pursuit. When a man tells me I feel like I don't have a purpose in life, first off, I'm like, dude, I've been there. And second off, I say,
Welcome to the club.
yeah, welcome to the club. I understand. And second, maybe there's merit in just the simple pursuit of trying to see what you're capable of in one department, whether that's your body, whether that's your mind, whether that's your relationship, whether that's your business or your finances. But there's merit in that. And so for me, I wanted to try and set some context for what men's work could be and take it out of, yeah, I think in mainstream media, it's kind of been used in association with like hug parties, and like
Yes.
these, guys getting together and just laying around and holding one another and stuff like that. And it's like, no, 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 no. That's, I mean, I'll hug my buddies, don't get me wrong, but I'm certainly not sitting around doing that. And that's not what I'm advocating for. So I appreciate your honesty and your perspective, because that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I think one thing I've seen a lot too is that guys in our space will use these terms like, tapping into your masculine core or your masculine energy.
Mm.
And in my mind, I'm like, what does that even mean? Like what,
Mm.
like, I kind of get what you're saying. I think I agree with people who say that, but also I don't know what they're explaining because they're using platitudes that really don't have any meaning. And I would love to ask you, when you're talking about, because you brought up tapping back into their masculinity, what is it specifically that you mean by that?
Mm. I mean, tapping into the principles and values that you attribute to masculinity, and letting your life be a representation of those principles and values. And if you're able to live, and I would, some people would use the word embody, but I would just say, if you're able to live those principles as often as humanly possible and move yourself towards living those principles and values as frequently as you can, that again, that's a worthy endeavor, but that's a reconnection to your masculine core. Because our masculine core, for me, all that means, and I think I love the way you defined it on my show. You said, masculinity is amoral, right? It's neither good nor bad. But I think at our masculine core, we crave certain things, right? Leadership is one of them. Freedom, I think, is another big component of that. And so I think as we tune into these principles and values and we start to live them, that is a kind of ignition of our masculine core. I also think that there's emotions that are sometimes connected to those things, right? We can see anger oftentimes gets associated with masculinity, but it's usually in a way that is disrespectful or villainized. And I don't necessarily think that anger is necessarily a bad thing. I think that assertiveness and non-compliance is actually a very beneficial thing for a man to cultivate and hone. And I talk about those things, the value of non-compliance, and that if you look historically and anthropologically throughout cultures, cross cultures throughout the history of our human species, men who have been non-compliant have oftentimes stood on, I wouldn't want to say the right side of history, but they have certainly helped to reconcile things within culture. And I think we're in one of those inflection points, not to get too off topic, but I think we're in one of those inflection points where we need to connect to that sense of assertiveness. We need to connect to that sense of non-compliance, and that is actually becoming a much more valuable asset that is necessary for men to connect to in a time where I think the modern narrative is trying to disconnect you as a man from that assertiveness and from that non-compliance and from some of these core tenets and values that we've traditionally held as men. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll close here, is I think that that's a byproduct of us living for generations with non-initiated men, with men who haven't been initiated into manhood. So there's been this drought of initiation. And I think that men like yourself are out there in the world providing initiatory spaces, for your sons, for the up and coming generations. And so I think that's, yeah, I'll pause there because I said a few things that I'll tie into that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to non-compliance, I'm just thinking through this. I would agree that is a masculine characteristic. I would say what makes it manly is the righteous application of it, right? If I, for example, I could be a non-compliant individual and try to put people under my thumb and victimize and villainize, or not villainize, but victimize other people, I would say that might be a masculine characteristic, but it certainly wouldn't be righteous.
Completely.
But if you were to stand up to, COVID restrictions are a great example of that in my mind. That's an infringement upon freedoms of people, and you're standing up against that. I would say that's a manly characteristic because you're doing it in the service of other people.
Yeah, I would agree.
But I don't know that there are, I don't know that there are emotions that I would consider masculine. Like for anger is one you said. I don't know if that's a masculine emotion. I think the way that we respond to it could be, certainly, because I think men are probably more prone to act physically due to anger, whereas women might be more conniving. I guess I'm just speaking off the cuff here.
There's a good word. There's a good. Okay, well, let's just say this. I think maybe it's not so much a masculine emotion as it is a more socially acceptable emotion for men to feel, express, and convey. And I think that historically that's been the case, right? It's like if you look at the access point to a man's inner world, oftentimes anger is the vault for him to really get into his inner workings, whether that's his psyche or his body, or just his inner world. Anger is oftentimes the sort of vault door that he has to be able to crack through to understand the rest of his internal landscape. And whether that's a masculine emotion, maybe not. I think it maybe is more socially acceptable for men. But I certainly think that it's relevant and important for men to be able to explore because there's merit. Look, maybe I'll just say this. If you're disconnected from your anger as a man, the chances of you creating real order and structure in your life are slim to none. And if your anger is out of control in your life, the chances of you having real intimacy and closeness in your life are slim to none. So we as men have a very specific and peculiar relationship to our anger that I think is valuable for us to explore at some point in our lives.
Yeah, I want to unpack that because I've actually experienced that in my life relatively recently, where I've realized that there's a lot of pent up anger and frustration in my life. Maybe that's why I've been resonating with your messaging so deeply lately, that I have subdued for
Mm,
decades. And realizing that I have an unhealthy relationship with it, and it usually manifests itself as impatience, yelling, raising my voice, being frustrated and contentious, never, I would say not physical, because I do have some physical outlets between working out and jujitsu where it's I think appropriate use of physical aggression. Uh, but yeah, I would love to tap into how a man begins to understand where his anger issues might be coming from and might be stemming from, and what kind of work he should do to harness it for productive outcomes. Because I do believe that even the so-called negative emotions are there to serve us, like anger.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's in IFS, which is it's a therapeutic modality called internal family systems. They say there's no bad parts in internal family systems. And so part of, I'm going to use the dreaded term, but part of shadow work is, and I'm sure that we'll talk about it maybe
We
at some
will. Oh
point, but
yes, we will. I've got notes to talk about that here.
is being able to look at the aspects of ourselves that we vehemently dislike, and part of that might be our anger. We might dislike our anger. We might dislike the fact that we have grief from something, grief from a divorce or losing a child or losing a parent. And we don't like that emotion. So we don't know how to deal with it. And so it just becomes something that we try and get away from within ourselves. But the getting away from it is not possible, right? It's a part of you. So
Yeah.
when it comes to anger, I mean, you've probably heard of nice guy syndrome, right? This concept
Sure,
of
of
like being
course.
a nice guy. And nice guys are and I fell into this line in my early 20s. I was a classic nice guy. But nice guys are generally guys who are afraid of their own anger. Now, why are they afraid of their own anger? Oftentimes it's because they grew up in a household where they had an abusive father, where they had a man in their life who was very vocally angry, right? Very loud, very confrontational, maybe emotionally abusive or verbally abusive, maybe physically abusive at times. And that boy became a man who said, I'll never treat people like that. Right. I'll never be like my dad. I'll never be like that man. And so he, over time, slowly disconnects from his own anger because he sees it as dangerous. He sees it as violent. He sees it as a problem. And he doesn't see the value in building a healthy relationship to his anger. So that's on the one side. On the other side is a man who likely had to learn anger as a means or aggression as a means of self-protection. And
Definitely.
again, that could be, having an abusive father, et cetera. So, for example, myself, I grew up between two households, and I grew up between two very different fathers, my stepfather and my actual father. And my dad was very disconnected from his anger, didn't show anger a lot. When he did get angry, he'd kind of shut down. He'd never get angry at his kids, but he'd get angry at like stupid stuff, just like
Mm.
seemingly like he had this, maybe it's just funny, but he had this like real anger towards ants, like black ants in the house. Like
Answer.
he would just lose his
Yeah.
shit,
Who
and
who
like,
doesn't get upset over ants crawling around
I
in the
agree.
kitchen periodically?
I agree.
That's
But then
interesting.
but then my stepdad, is this completely different human being and who raised me. And he had a very short temper. He would blow up at the drop of a hat. He was verbally abusive sometimes, emotionally abusive, sometimes physically abusive. And so I saw these two versions of men that were wildly different. And I would oftentimes oscillate between the two of them. Sometimes in my life, I'd be completely shut down emotionally. Other times in my life, I would be like, wild and out of control. And usually when my anger came out, it came out in getting into bar fights, getting into fights in hockey because I played hockey for, most of my life. And so it would come out in these ways that weren't healthy. So in my everyday life, in my relationships, I had crappy boundaries. I wasn't able to say no all the time to women. And so I was disempowered because I disconnected from my anger where it mattered most. But where I let my anger out was in the areas where it mattered least, and it was often coming out sideways. It was coming out through, mismanaged, maladapted violence. So why is our anger valuable? Just as an example, it's valuable because it helps us to set boundaries and structure with the people in our lives. And boundaries and structure teach other people how to treat us. So if you're disconnected from your anger, then when you set a boundary, it's not going to have any substance. When you tell somebody no, it's not going to have any oomph behind it. They're not really going to feel what you're saying. They're not really going to feel like, oh, you mean what you're saying. You're telling me no and you mean what you're saying.
There's no
On the other
consequence
side,
behind crossing that
yeah,
boundary.
exactly, right?
It's
They're
not
like,
even a boundary.
yeah, it's like, you're a wet noodle. I can walk right through that. You're telling
Right.
me no, but you probably mean yes, or like, I can walk all over you and it won't matter. On the other side, if your anger is aggressive and loud and all consuming, when you go to set a boundary, set structure with somebody, it feels like you can't trust it. It feels like, oh, if I even question this or test this, there's going to be a really substantial consequence. And so for parenting, for intimate relationships, it keeps people at arm's reach. It actually pushes people away because they're scared to get close to you. So we as men have to try and grapple with this kind of dragon that sometimes lives within us, like the fire. Like when I feel angry, it kind of like starts in my body. It kind of, I get real hot. I've described it
Mm-hmm.
as like the Iron Man core turns on in my chest. And
Yeah,
then,
sure.
if it reaches my head, then it's game over. But that's the merit in being able to build some kind of a healthy relationship with our anger, because it's either going to destroy and tear down the things that we love most, or it's going to ensure that people walk all over us and we don't teach them where we stand and what we'll tolerate.
Hey, Connor, let me excuse myself one more time. I'm on a
Yep.
new diet challenge with my buddies, and I've been drinking a
Okay.
ton of water, so I have to pee so bad. Just
Go, man,
give me
go.
a second, okay?
As long as you keep this in the recording.
All right, I'm back.
We're back.
Actually, the pee thing, I was thinking about it as I was peeing. Is actually an interesting discussion point, because I know of guys along the same lines of what we're talking about. Because I know guys who will literally piss themselves over saying, "Hey, hold on, I got to stop the conversation for a second and go take care of myself." Like, I think that
Mm-hmm.
falls into what we're talking about. They're so worried about what other people are thinking or how they might look that it comes at the expense of their own well-being.
Yeah,
Does that make
100%.
sense?
Yeah, I mean, we sell, some guys have grown up in environments where they've had to sell their own authenticity, their own truth for a sense of belonging, right? So what I
Yes.
mean by that is some of us have had to trade what we actually want, desire, need for a sense of, oh, I belong in this family, right? I mean, everybody's heard the classic case, like, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, otherwise you're banned from this family. You have to follow this way of being within our family, otherwise you're not allowed to be a part of it. And so I think some guys have definitely grown up in that environment where they haven't trusted that it's okay to be them, but that's one of the most attractive things to women oftentimes, is that you are,
Worse.
I want to use the word unapologetically you, but yeah, I mean, we could probably dig into that a little bit, but to be unapologetically who you are.
why wouldn't you use that word? I mean, that's what I would use. So do you have a hang up with that word?
Not necessarily. I think it's just some guys take that to mean to never apologize,
Right. Or to be a
for,
dick.
yeah, to be an asshole. Yeah, exactly. Which
Right.
is not what I'm talking about.
Our audience here is they get it. They get nuance, because
Yeah.
we've talked a lot about it. It is amazing though on social media how you could use one word and everybody's like, well, okay. There's context to what we're talking about, and I can't explain all of the context in 140 characters on Twitter. I'm
Right.
sorry. You're going to have to exercise your mind a little bit on this one.
Oh, it's the ability for discourse. I mean, I can't even mention Jordan Peterson on my Instagram page without getting some message from somebody being like, "I'm unfollowing you." It's like, dude, I didn't even say whether I liked him or not. I just said his name. Like, what are you on about? Like,
Yeah.
if you can't
Yeah.
hear somebody's name, like, but that's the type of, like, I would call that dysregulated. And all I mean by that term dysregulated is that people become, I'm trying to just not like psychoanalyze and not use that type of terminology, but dysregulated simply means that you're no longer in control. Your
Yes.
emotions is, your reactivity is, your aggression is, your disapproval is, your embarrassment is. Like those things within you start to take the wheel. And I think that as men, we find a deeper sense of freedom of being in the leadership position within our own vehicle, right? Within our own minds, within our own hearts, within our own bodies. That is really what I am always trying to advocate for. Is how do you be in control of your own wheel and not so pushed about by other people's comments or ways of being or lifestyles. It's like if those things are causing you to be reactive all the time, it's like, man, that's going to be an annoying life. It's going to be annoying all the time.
It's going to be annoying. It's going to be unsuccessful. You're going to be lonely because nobody's going to want to be around you. And I found that to be true. I'm glad you said dysregulated. I actually wrote down in my notes here, I wrote down erratic before you even said dysregulated, because I
Yeah.
know that when I got angry in the past, even just over the past 6 months or so, I've really been trying to work on this, that little things like ants in the kitchen would fire me up. Like I'd have my own ants. They weren't ants, but they were something else that's ridiculous that I
Yeah.
shouldn't get upset about. And what I've realized and what I'm continuing to realize is that not only do I not feel good, it's not good to feel like that. It doesn't feel good, is that other people don't trust you. Like your
Yeah.
wife's, if you're erratic, your wife is not going to trust you with her thoughts because she doesn't know how you're going to respond to them. Your kids aren't going to trust you with their stories or how their day was because they don't trust that you're a stable source of feedback for them, and that's the pit that I fell into over the past several years that I'm trying to work through and out of currently, which is admittedly pretty challenging to do.
100%, man. I mean, I think, yeah, I've yet to meet a man who doesn't want to be a rock for the people that he loves most in his life.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's just something extremely valuable that's sort of baked into our DNA almost, where we want to be a lighthouse that our families can crash against sometimes and say, I'm getting bullied at school. Or, have our wives come to us and say, my mom said this and I don't know how to deal with it. And for us to just be solid and grounded and to be able to discern what's needed in that moment, because it's not always the same thing. It's not always advice. It's not always fixing their problem. Sometimes it's just being able to listen to them. But if we are erratic, as you're saying, if we let our anger get the best of us, then they don't trust us and they can't come to us. And we sort of lose that position, and we lose the capacity for our family to lean on us and rely on us. And I think that culturally, that's a huge problem, specifically with fathers, and I think you've talked about it. I've certainly talked about it, that there's this kind of plague of absent fathers within our culture, and that can look many, many, many different ways. So,
Yeah, I think when you say often they don't need our advice, the only thing I would change about that is that very rarely I think do people need our advice. Like
yeah,
I'm learning that now. I'm 41 years old, and I'm just learning that. I'm learning to say, "Oh man," to my wife when she says I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z, to say, "Man, that must be really hard. You doing
yeah,
okay?" Like that's it. Like no, hey, you should try this or tweak this or adjust that. It's just to say, man, I'm sorry. Like that must be really hard to deal with. That must make you feel bad. How do you feel about that with my wife, with my
yeah,
kids? Oh my gosh. The difference between that and me trying to solve it by giving her answers that she's not looking for is amazing. I wish I would have learned that 20 years ago and been able to employ that more. The question I do have is, a lot of guys listening, I imagine, like myself, understand their erratic behavior, understand that they probably don't have a healthy relationship with anger or frustration or past trauma or baggage or whatever it is they're dealing with. What do you do? How do you begin to develop and build a healthy relationship with anger and boundaries and identify where some of these emotional issues are stemming from? What's the work there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different ways you can approach this. I think if we could just sort of zero in on a couple things, you can get a sense of where to start. One, I would say look at the blueprint of your family growing up, because they're just like your family system growing up is just your blueprint of how you respond to the world, how your body, how your nervous system, how your mind responds to things. So if you grew up in an environment that was hostile all the time and you saw your parents fighting all the time, that had an impact on you. Either it likely created a version of you that doesn't ever want to be in conflict with your spouse, and so you act a very specific way, or it created this version of you where you are always in conflict, because that's what you saw, because that's what you knew, and that's the environment that you grew up in.
I don't think it just has an impact on you. I think it programs you. Like I
Right.
think it's
Yes.
significantly more than, hey, it's has a little bit of influence on you. Like I realized that looking in the mirror at 41 years old, I didn't have a great close relationship with my dad. I didn't really even see him all that much, but holy shit, am I just like him? I mean,
Hmm.
just like him, not from the way I look, but the way I behave and the temptations I'm distracted by and enticed by. It's him. Like
Yeah.
I've become him. Like I didn't even
Yeah.
have that much connection with him growing up. And we have all been programmed and we don't even know it. Some healthy
Well, and
programming, some unhealthy programming.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, in the book, I talk about the shadow of the father, and I'm going to answer your previous question, but I talk about the shadow of the father, which is, I sort of say like the shadow that your father casts is neither good or bad; it's just inevitable. And we might live in the shadow of our father because he was an exceptional man, and he was just larger than life, and he was incredible, and everybody loved him. And so we're constantly chasing, trying to be him or surpass him. We might be living in the shadow of our father because we want to live a life in opposition of who he was, because he was an asshole, or he was
Mm-hmm.
violent, or he was abusive, or he was an alcoholic, or he was gone, or whatever the case may be. And so we have to, a huge part of a man's work, and there's usually, I had a ton of resistance around this when I first started working with my mentor years and years and years ago. But a huge part of a man's work is being able to look at what's my relationship to my father, because he's the blueprint of masculinity and being a man. It's just a fact, or whoever the male was that was most around you in your life. He's the blueprint for what you looked up to as a child, and looked at and said, that's what it looks like to be a man, that's what it looks like to be masculine. So we have to be able to look at that and reconcile with that in some capacity in order to step out of that shadow and live our own life. The other pieces of what it looks like
Connor,
for,
can
I
I
think your
stop you
question.
on that one just real
Please. Yeah.
quick?
Yeah.
So I just want to push a little bit harder on that. So we have to look at the relationship, and that's what I mean. And maybe you're getting to the answer on that is like, how do you do that? Like how, like, is that journaling? Is it just sitting and pontificating on all the experiences you had with your father? Is it interviewing him or people in your life that knew both of you? Like what, like tactically, what does that actually
Yeah.
look like? Because that's what I want. Like I want to
Yeah.
do that, but I don't know what that means or how to do it. It makes sense.
Yes.
Now, what do we do?
So I'll give you this one, and then we can talk about anger and give the tacticals
Awesome.
for that as well. So with your father, there's a number of different ways to go about it, but the very simple place that you start is, am I trying to avoid being like him, or am I trying to be like him and surpass him? So just kind
Mm.
of seeing what area do I fall into, and then you can dig a little bit deeper and say, what did I learn from my father? So you could journal about this, right? What were some of the lessons that I wanted to learn from him? What were the lessons that I wanted him to teach me, but I never got? Because that'll show you the vacancy that you're likely feeling into as a man, the things that you actually never received.
Mm.
And then, who did I actually want him to be as a father? What I've learned over the years is that many men have a version of who they wanted their father to be. Right. I wanted him to be nicer. I wanted him to show up to my baseball games more. I wanted him to be nicer to my mom. I wanted him to teach me, how to camp, whatever it is. But most men have a version of their father who has never showed up. And that's who they really have to start to get to know. who did you want your father to be that he wasn't? So that's just a good thing to sit down and journal with. The other thing that I did that I think is great is write out 20 questions that you want to ask your father. And if he's still alive, sit down and ask him.
Hmm.
I sat down with my dad and I had written out 20 questions, and they started off very easy and light, and then they got much more difficult and deep, to the point where I was asking him, like, why did you get divorced? And were you having an affair? Because that conversation had never been had. And so
What was his
that is a
response to some of those questions? How did he take that question
he was a little
asking?
prick he was a little prickly. Yeah, I mean, he was a little, like, his guard was up, and it was challenging for him to have that conversation. But I was clear with him, like, I said, I'm asking you these questions because I genuinely want to know who you are and want to be free of judging you for anything.
Hmm.
And I think there was something about that comment that he could respect, because I was very clear that I'm not trying to blame you for anything. I'm not trying to drag things out. I'm not trying to blame my life on you. I actually want to free myself from having you be the, background reason for any of my problems in life. I actually want to let that go
Right.
entirely.
Right.
And so I think that helped him a lot. So write down 20 questions, sit down with your father, ask him those questions. If you don't know your dad, try and go on a journey to understand who he was. Many men, it's like 1 in 4 kids in America will grow up without a father in the household now, which is astronomical. So there's a high chance you just didn't really know your father. And so part of your journey might be to actually go on a little bit of a quest to interview the people that knew him best, to understand him. And I've given that to guys who, their father left, or had an affair and they didn't see them anymore, or they were workaholics and they just never got to see them, etc. So that can also be a worthy endeavor. And then lastly, I would say, ask yourself the question, be really, really honest. What about your father or your relationship to your father have you resented? And I think that a lot of men are carrying around, at least maybe I shouldn't generalize, a lot of men that I've worked with over the last decade from all over the world, not just North America, Europe, Asia, Australia, the UK, Ireland, are carrying resentment towards their father. And resentment is just poisonous. It gets in the
Yeah.
way of our relationship with our fathers. And because our fathers were a blueprint, again, for what it means to be a man and to be masculine unconsciously, we carry that resentment somewhere within us. Friedrich Nietzsche, I put this quote in the book, but Friedrich Nietzsche said that within the son is the hidden secrets of the father. Within the son is the hidden secrets of the father. And so there's this notion that whatever was hiding within our fathers, whatever he didn't have developed within himself, that we are carrying that on in some capacity within our relationships, within our lives. So get clear on what you may resent your father for, and see, what would it require of you to forgive him? What would it mean to let that go? How might you do that? Do you need to write a letter to him that you never send, that you burn? Do you need to sit in conversation with other men and be able to discuss some of the shit that you went through as a kid? I think one of the things that we underestimate as men, and maybe just as a culture, is that grief is meant to be shared. And the amount of men that I have seen, and it's heartbreaking in some in some degree, but the amount of men that I've seen that are carrying pain from their childhood, specifically from their fathers, is massive. Fathers who were abusive, fathers who were not around, fathers who were just cruel and mean. I mean, the stories that I've heard from some kids, from some guys' lives, it's no wonder that they have a short temper with their kids, because it's what they got.
Yeah, of
Like,
course.
I'll just give you a personal example. When I was like 10 to 11, 12 years old, my stepdad, God bless him. He was the main parent in my life. He drove me to hockey practice all the time. I mean, this isn't to spite him in any way. He really helped to raise me and make me the man that I am today. But when I was a kid, he didn't know how to deal with me because I was out of control. hyper all the time and bouncing around, and I was just a wild, wild little kid. I was like your typical boy that was just a wild hellraiser, causing all kinds of pranks. But he didn't know how to deal with me. And so whenever things between us got rough, he would completely lose his temper, and he would say things like, "You're such a stupid piece of shit. What the fuck is wrong with you? Why can't you get it right?" And when that didn't work, then it would escalate to physical violence. So that, as a boy, I didn't understand what to do with that. I was just hurt by it, right? I just
Yeah. How
carried
could
this
you?
heaviness and this
Of
weight,
course.
and I just didn't know how to, I didn't know how to deal with that. And so when I became older, I just didn't trust men because I saw men as being abusive. That if I built a really strong relationship with a man, it was probably inevitable that he was going to try and hurt me in some capacity. He's going to lie, he's going to betray me, because that's what I grew up with. The man that I was closest with in my life would berate me when I would get something wrong, in hockey. And I had so much evidence to prove that men are going to hurt me. And so that turned me into a man who, in some ways, disconnected from what it meant to be a good man, to be a great man. And in some ways, it turned me into somebody who didn't know how to deal with his own anger. So my inner dialogue, and this is maybe the last thing I'll say, my inner dialogue was brutal. I do this exercise at men's weekends that I lead, where I'll have a guy write down what he normally says to himself when he gets something wrong, and he'll write out like, "What the hell's wrong with you? You're so stupid. Like, how could you have done such a, blah, blah, blah." And then I'll say, "Okay, sit across from the man next to you and say those things to him."
Mm.
Right. That inner critic that you're normally
Yeah.
talking to yourself as, say that to another man. And
So
what
hard to
most men
do.
quickly realize, like, I don't want to do that. Like, I like this
Right.
guy. Like, why would I
Of
talk to him?
course.
And so the reality is that most men are living in a kind of self-abusive relationship where they are talking to themselves and treating themselves like garbage. They're verbally abusing themselves internally. They're berating themselves constantly. They're literally just beating the shit out of themselves day in and day out. And it's like, well, if you don't rectify that relationship, first and foremost, how are you supposed to have a healthy marriage and relationship with your kids? But secondly, that voice came from somewhere. You learned that voice from someone. And what I realized in my probably late 20s, thankfully, because I'm of a mentor, was that my inner dialogue was so violent and so abusive because I was carrying on the relationship with my stepdad. That voice inside of me literally was him. And so what most men need to realize sometimes and wake up to is that the voice, the way that they speak to themselves, is often a byproduct of the way that a father spoke to them, a way that a coach spoke to them, a way that a parent spoke to them, that they are carrying on within themselves. And so that's why it's so important to explore, to start to see who treated me in this way, and that I'm now allowing myself to treat this way. Does that make sense what I'm saying about the inner dialogue
Makes,
and the critic?
yeah. I mean, I'm enthralled just because, yeah, I mean, this resonates deeply with me. I was thinking about, as you were saying what was the quote by Nietzsche again? What was the quote?
What is hidden in the father will be revealed in the son. I got a little backwards when I said it the first time, but what is hidden in the father will be revealed in the son.
Got it. Okay. So I was thinking to myself, there's probably a lot of guys who are not willing to do this work for probably multiple reasons. Maybe it's just painful. I think that's probably the biggest. It's just painful. It might be that they don't know how. That might be an issue. It might be that it's painful. I would say that's probably a big issue. And in my head, I'm thinking to myself, with 3 boys and a little girl, I'm like, man, if I'm not willing to do it for myself, because we were talking about your father, but what about your kids' father, which is you? If you're not willing to do it for yourself for whatever reason, man, think about what we can do for our sons if we figure this stuff out. Because if we don't, they're doomed, just like we were.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I hear guys be like, yeah, my dad, my father, my this, my that. It's like, okay, well, all that's true. And I agree with you. It's like programming. It's all true. But you're also a grown-ass man. And so it's time to put that stuff aside, to address it, so you can set it aside, not just ignore it, but to address it so you
Mhm.
can put it aside and change the trajectory of our lives for ourselves, yes, and also for our sons who will have our secrets revealed in them.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I couldn't have put it better. I mean, the first line in my book is a man's work begins in pain. It's the
Mm,
first line because I think that that is the true calling of what the essence of a man's work is supposed to be. If you as a man don't know how to deal with your own pain, not only are you screwed, but the people around you are screwed because you're going to pass that pain on through your interactions with them, through your conversations with them. And so part of what we have to do is build some kind of an understanding of what hurt us, what caused us pain, and why and where we're passing that pain on in our lives. Because if we're not aware of that, then we're just a slave to it. We're
yeah.
just naturally doing it. And we do owe it to our kids. I mean, a part of the reason why I've done this work and I wrote this book is because I have a son and I want to have a much better relationship with him than I did with my parents, with my father, with my stepdad. And I know my anger is wild sometimes, you know. I still get it wrong. Like you were talking about your wife and, you know, not intervening. It's like I've been doing this work for a while. I'm at like 60-40. You know, 60% of the time I can be like, that sounds hard. And 40% of the time I'm like, you should do this.
You still want to solve it. I know, man.
You
Like
know?
I can hear myself talking like almost audibly arguing like, oh, you should do this. And then the little devil on the sides, like do this. And then the little angel on my other shoulder is like, just shut up, just listen, nod
Yeah.
your head and acknowledge what she's saying. And that's all. And it's like
Yes.
this just debate that is like real. I can feel it in my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah. Well, I think it's where we find value as men, right? We want to be of value to our
Of
partners, to
course.
our wives, to our girlfriends, right? And so
Of
I
course.
think I think that we try and be of value to our wives and our girlfriends how we would normally be of value to other men. And that's the mistake, right?
Mm,
Another man might actually want you to say, "Well, have you thought about this? Have you done it this way? Have you talked to this guy?" And he'd be like, "Oh shit, I haven't done any of those things. Thanks, brother." But our wife is like, I don't want you to do any of those things. I
right.
just want you to understand what the hell I'm feeling. And so that's the gap. But it's very, again, just to sort of bring this all back around, it is very challenging to do any of the things that we're talking about if your life is being run by your pain. And it is hard to do the work that you and I are talking about. You know, I remember I worked with a Navy SEAL who came to work with me because he was having some challenges in his relationship. And we started to work on his past and some of the things that he'd been carrying, grief from being in battle, from his childhood, from his relationship with his father. And I walked him through this exercise that was pretty intense. And he, you know, once the exercise was done, I said, "How do you feel? Like, how did that go?" And he paused and he looked at me and he just said, "Man, I would rather rush a
Of
machine gun
course.
nest in Afghanistan than do this shit. Like, this is
Of
so hard."
course.
But it's the stuff that made the difference in his relationship, you know. And I do think that, you know, a lot of us as men are just carrying around a pain that is debilitating our capacity as a father or as a business leader or as a husband. And there's a gentleman named Francis Weller who says that your pain has its own intelligence. And I think that's true. You know, it's like when you get into an argument with your wife and she says something and you blow up, you know, and you get reactive. Well, what's getting reactive? It's your pain, right? Saying, I don't like that you said that. I feel embarrassed, or, you know, whatever it is that you end up saying. So your pain has its own intelligence. So you better learn to listen to that part of you. Otherwise, that part of you is going to cause absolute chaos in your life. It will cause chaos, right? And Carl Jung, famous Swiss psychologist, said that your shadow, I'm going to bring back the shadow, is the part of you that gets in the way of your most well-meaning goals and aims and thwarts them. So this part of you is the part of you that's sabotaging you, your pain,
Mm.
your hurt. So I don't know if I'm making a good enough case for it, but
I
maybe we
think
can
you
talk
are.
about what to do with it and maybe
No,
some of
I
the other
think you
pieces
are.
that you want to get into.
Well, as you were saying that, I was thinking about you were talking earlier about being a rock. right? Every
Yeah.
man wants to be a rock for his, I would just say for his people. So whether that's your employees or your kids or your wife or your friends, for your people, you want to be a rock. And what I found in my own life, this applies to me for sure, is that we can't be that stable rock when we're trying to search for validation from other people.
Mm.
Because if that's what we're after, whether it's your wife's approval, like, hey, a pat on the back, like, thanks for taking out the trash today, good boy. And if that's what makes you happy, then you're just going to be tossed to and fro based on the whims of other people rather than, hey, I got up and I went to the gym today. There's a snowstorm out here right now. It's a pretty good storm. The roads are a little snowy and icy. I would have had every excuse in the world to stay at home, but I went not because my wife would know or because she would validate me for going or I would, but because that was the commitment I made. And I'm trying to figure out how I can validate myself. Like, I don't need it from you, Connor, with all due respect. I don't need it from that's why I can ask you challenging questions because I don't care. Like I want to know I'm able to validate myself. And when guys can do that, that's where they become that stable rock that isn't going to be tossed by a woman's emotions or a man's strange look or maybe some shady business dealing. You know, somebody took advantage of you, which sucks, of course, and you'll be upset, but it's not going to toss you into this downward spiral of emotional chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing that you're talking about that's so valuable that I think that we often under index the importance of it, which is self-recognition and self-validation. The truth is that if you as a man haven't developed the internal skill of self-validation, you will constantly seek that from outside of yourself. So you'll look to the women in your life, you'll look to the men in your life, you'll look to your kids even, and you'll say, validate me, reinforce that I have worth. And so self-validation and self-recognition is a skill, but it requires that you have some internal sense of compassion. And that's the real kicker. So if your internal dialogue is just constantly beating the crap out of yourself and self-deprecation, how are you supposed to recognize yourself? Because nothing's ever good enough, right? So I just want to come back to the anger piece and give you like 4 simple things. I don't know if I ever answered that unless there's a different direction that you want
before I
to
get
take
to
it.
that, I want to ask you one other question that's been pressing for me is, you know, we hear a lot about this idea of self-love and self-validation and proving it to yourself and taking care of yourself and the whole analogy of the oxygen mask, you know, if you're going down on a plane, we all hear that. And maybe to get a little personal with you, where does the conversation about God come into that mix? Because I know for me is I try to validate myself through my actions. Like I try to be in integrity, not always, of course, but I try to be. And I know when I am in integrity, I feel really good about myself. But also I'm learning to derive my sense of worth through my divine nature and that I am a divine being, a son of God. I don't need validation from anybody. That's already who I am. I'm really curious about your take on that.
It's a really solid question and like enough that makes me really pause to contemplate it. I think how I've always viewed this is, can I operate as a man to treat myself in the way that God would treat me? Because God certainly didn't make me to just punish me all the time. You know, God likely created me because, and us and all of us and everything in existence, because there's love in some capacity. And of course, there's hardship. And of course, there's all of those other pieces, right? There's challenges and there's, you know, things that we have to push through and et cetera. But absolutely part of the equation is that, and under everything, under all of that, under the challenge, under the whole thing is God's love. I would say it's God's love for us, God's love for me, God's love for you. And so can I operate in alignment with how God would love me, with how God would treat me? And can I embody that as often as possible? Which likely means that I need to treat myself in the image or in the perspective of how I think he would treat me in that moment. And so sometimes that means being compassionate, you know, and understanding that I'm flawed and I'm human and I'm not God. And so I'm going to get it wrong. And that doesn't mean letting myself off the hook, but it means giving myself grace Grace, with the capital G. I think that's one of God's greatest gifts is grace. And it's oftentimes for him to give, but it's for us to practice. And so we have to practice giving ourselves grace. I think that's so valuable. And then the second piece is the recognition. Of course, God gives us recognition in many different ways. But I think, again, why should God give us recognition or provide us with validation externally through our business, through success, through accomplishments, through all of those things, if we aren't willing to do that for ourselves? Why should God have to do that if we're not willing to do that for ourselves? I mean, part of, I think, if when I read most scriptures, what I see is that man is possible is capable of many things and capable of receiving many things from God and through God, but that we oftentimes have to embody that first, that we have to take the leap first. It's like Indiana Jones, having to step out on the invisible bridge first. It's like, that's faith, brother. That's faith. So like, if you're asking God for forgiveness, why should he give it to you first until you step out on that bridge and try and find it for yourself? If you're asking him for grace and compassion and validation, why should God give any of those things to you first before you have trained yourself in being able to give those things to yourself first? So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I was just curious. I'm thinking about that analogy of the bridge in Indiana Jones. What's interesting about that with regards to God's grace is that you said, you have to take the leap of faith first. Actually, no. And I'll tell you why I think that's the case is because the bridge is there. The grace is already there. You just don't see it yet. It's not like you take the leap of faith and then he builds the bridge as you go. No, the bridge has already been built. You just need to walk on it. But that is the faith component. You need to trust that it's there and then walk on it. I'm trying to figure that out. I'm saying it as if like guys need to do this. I need to do this.
But you still have to do it, right? God can't convince you to walk on the bridge. Otherwise, that's not faith. That's all I'm saying. Agreed. Is that we as men are often looking for something not to be given to us, but but there's just this value in developing some of these things within ourselves. Self-compassion, self-validation. Not so that you can, fit into the Instagram or YouTube mold of self-love and the emotions that are out there. I mean, all of that is just sometimes obnoxious and so ridiculously cliche, but more so because you have, in my terms, aligned yourself closer with God's intended creation, and that there's value in that, and that you find yourself closer to God in the act of doing so. You find yourself closer to God in the act of self-validation, self-recognition, being able to give grace sometimes to yourself. Again, not to let yourself off the hook. It requires discernment, right? To be able to discern, am I just letting myself off the hook because I'm being lazy? Sometimes it's true, or am I giving myself grace to not beat the living crap out of myself because I'm flawed and I did the best that I could? That's also true. So I think that that's how we begin to live life from a spiritual place.
I love it. That concept of alignment, I wrote that down and highlighted it and did all the things so I could remember that, but alignment's valuable. I think you were going to share, if I heard you correctly, maybe a 4-part framework for dealing with your anger. If I heard you right, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I wanted to give something a little tactical because I know we kind of touched on it and didn't get around to it. Step 1, get to know the signs. Get to know the signs of your anger. And those signs are physical. They are language-based. So you'll probably be saying certain things. You might hear yourself saying the same thing over and over again. You might hear yourself using what I call absolutes, right? You always, you never. I go to that all the time. That's how I know that I am reactive and that my anger has a hold of me, right? You always, you never. How come you never do this? How come you always blah, blah, blah? So get very familiar with the signs of what you say and what it feels like physically in the body, right? So for me, I start to feel this like heat and energy rising up through my core. And then it feels like, again, that Iron Man analogy, Iron Man has that core right in the center of his chest. It feels like when I start to lose my temper, like that part of me just gets switched on. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, I can feel this massive amount of energy right in the middle of my chest, and it's moving up into my head. Step number 2 is name that out loud. Name it out loud. I am angry. I'm getting angry.
Mm.
Or I am too angry. Or I'm losing my temper. Not because of the other person, not to blame, not to judge them or any of those things, but you just name it out loud. I'm being reactive. I'm feeling reactive. Step number 3 is, and this is maybe going to be a little controversial, but say what you're feeling behind the anger. Say what you're feeling behind the anger. So anger is almost always a secondary emotion.
Why is that?
All,
You said this might be controversial. I don't think that is, but why do you think that might be controversial?
Because many of us have lived a life with a very small emotional palette where we feel happy, we feel angry, or we feel nothing. That's some guys, and like I was like this in the past. I felt happy, I felt angry, or I felt numb. And that's the case for a lot of guys. They don't realize that they maybe felt embarrassed first, or they felt anxious, or they felt ashamed, or they felt hurt, or they felt sad before they actually felt angry. So anger is a
Anger's
secondary
kind of
emotion.
the catch-all.
That's right. That's right. So it
Got
just
it.
becomes like, oh, I feel something and I don't like it. It's anger. So say
Got
what
it.
you're actually feeling. And that might take some practice where you're like, okay, I'm angry. What was I feeling just before this? And
Right.
maybe you felt disrespected.
Yeah,
Maybe you
that's the
felt,
word that came to mind for me is disrespected. Is like, I'm angry because you did this thing. Why am I angry? Because you're disrespecting me. It's like, okay, now we're getting closer to the real issue.
yeah. Yeah. So that's step number 3. Say what you're actually feeling. And then step number 4 is shift your attention from your thoughts to your body.
Okay, explain
Shift your
that.
attention from your thoughts to your body. So like I said, anger has a physical quality to it. All emotions have a physical quality to it, but anger specifically has a very physical quality to it. And if we're only aware of what we're thinking, we'll disconnect from the physical part of anger, and we won't be able to what's called down regulate. We won't be able to cool the heat of our anger.
Mm.
Okay. So if we're just stuck in our thoughts, how could she do that? Why did she say that? What the hell's wrong with her? Like, why didn't I think about this? Whatever is going on in our mind, we will not attend to the physical part of the heat that we feel in the body, and we won't be able to cool down. And so we'll
But
just stay in that hot space.
is it healthy to just, I mean, I'm not saying you're saying this, but here's what I'm gathering is, okay, now
Mhm.
you can begin to regulate your temper, right? Is that healthy? Or are you just suppressing it? And actually, what you should do is go to the gym or go for a run or hit your punching bag or whatever,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Attach it to something physical in nature.
Yes. So we could add a 5th step because I think this will be helpful for everyone that's listening, which is decide what to do with that. Do you
Mm.
need to go and sit and breathe? For one of the things that a lot of guys don't like is that they have to build up a tolerance for their anger. They have to build up tolerance to contain the energy, the like intensity of I'm fucking pissed right now. Sorry to swear so harshly on your show, but I'm pissed right now and I don't know what to do with the energy in my body. It's not so much the thoughts that we think, it's the intensity of the charge in the body, right? It's like this fierce energy that we start to feel that we don't know how to deal with or contain.
Yeah.
So discern or decide what you want to do with that energy. Maybe you go and sit and just close your eyes and breathe into it and see if you can just calm it down a little bit, or down regulate it. Maybe you go and press some of that energy into a punching bag. Maybe you go to the gym and lift some weights. Maybe you go for a run. Maybe you do some breath work. Maybe you take a cold shower. All of those things, really solid options to choose. I use all of them depending on what's going on in my life. But one of the best things to do is sit and use the breath. Your breath, because maybe I'll just say one last thing and I can see you got to follow up. When you are angry to that capacity where it starts to become defensive or aggressive or whatever it is, what's happening is that your body is moved into your sympathetic nervous system, which is like your stress the stress part of your nervous system. And the more that you're in that part of your nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system, the more that you're releasing cortisol and norepinephrine and adrenaline. And so your body is literally getting more and more and more and spun out. Your heart rate starts to elevate. Your breath rate per minute starts to elevate. And if you don't have any control over that part of you, over the physical part of you, then everything else doesn't matter, right? What you say, how you respond. If you're not able to regulate your breath and your heart rate and the physical sensations that you're having, then it'll always be a problem, because anger will show up and it'll consume you and it'll take over the show. So you have to start to get really familiar with what does it actually feel like, and can I build up a tolerance for that feeling, right? It's like getting punched for the first time. Probably the first time you get punched in the face, you have very little tolerance for it. You're not used to it. You're right. It's like the first time I got punched in the face when I was playing hockey, I was like, holy crap, like what, that was wild. But eventually you start to build up some tolerance for what that feels like. Anger is no difference, right? Anger is no different. If your story internally is, I hate that feeling, or I feel out of control when I'm angry, well, then you're always running from the anger. It always has the best of you. So you have to literally sit with that part of you and breathe and say, I can face you. Even as intense as you get, I can be with you. Because if you as a man can't be with your anger, how is your wife supposed to be with it? How are your kids supposed to be with it? So you have to do the hard thing to sit, eyes closed sometimes, in silence, and breathe and sit with the dragon of your anger. It's not the sexy thing to do. It's not the thing that a lot of therapists are going to tell you to do, but I think that it's the thing that I have seen the most benefit from in my life, because then when it shows up physically in my body, I'm not afraid of it. I don't let it take over. And there's some type of control where I can direct that energy. Or if it gets too much, then I can go and, go and use a punching bag. I can go and do
what you need
jujitsu. I can go do what I need to do.
Right. I think that's true of all of them, all emotions. I actually see a therapist myself, and we were talking about being sad. Like, what do you do when you're sad? And he said, be sad. Like sit in it, be sad. If you need to cry, cry. Like if you need to be sad and you're upset or guilt or what, like go ahead, just sit in that, let it out, experience it. And then it doesn't have control over you anymore. But too many guys won't do that. Like they're like, oh, well, I'm going to go distract myself, usually with an activity or friends or a woman or drugs, or in my case, alcohol. They're going to go do something to get out of that feeling rather than sitting with it. I wrote something down here too, and maybe this is point number 6, is I think we tend to get angry with our conversations and relationships with other people. That's typically where our anger comes from. I would say maybe exclusively. And one thing I've found to be helpful is asking myself, is what I'm feeling true? And it's usually not. Like, so for example, if I'm angry with my wife about something, the secondary feeling might be disrespect. I feel disrespected. She didn't do what I wanted to, and therefore she doesn't respect my authority or my desire or whatever, right? And then I ask myself, is it true that she doesn't respect me? Okay, probably not. So I might actually go to her and say, hey, hon, when we were talking earlier, you said this thing, and I was very angry about that because I felt disrespected, but I'm not sure how you meant it. Can you explain yourself? And then she explains herself, and you're like, oh, got it. Yeah, I completely misconstrued what you were saying or what you were getting at. And I found that to be really, really helpful for me, for what it's worth.
100%. No, that's a great caveat and asterisk to add in for sure. Is it true? Is what they're saying true?
Well, brother, this is a lot. I got a lot of notes here, as I always do, but man, I love our conversations. I love your perspective. It gives me a new way of looking at things that I don't naturally gravitate towards, which I think is where the value for me comes from. Why don't you let the guys know where to connect with you, obviously where to pick up a copy of the book, and how to learn more about what you're doing with men's work.
Man, I mean, men's work. I got the book right here.
That's right.
Boom, boom.
I'm excited to get that, man. I'm excited to get my copy. I think it's in
the
the mail or in the post.
It's on
the
PO
box. Yeah.
It's every chapter has questions to dig into, to journal on, prompts, and then exercises to integrate everything that I talk about. So mantalks.com/book. That's where you can find the book. And then mantalks.com is where you find me. And then on Instagram, mantalks. It's all the same.
It's all there. We're going to sync everything up and let the guys know where to go. Guys, I'm telling you, follow Connor, follow what he's doing, because it will be very, very helpful. And it's enough in alignment with what we do, but different enough where you get a perspective that I haven't brought to the table. And I think it rounds out the discussion for men. So I really appreciate our friendship and appreciate your perspective. Thanks for joining me, brother.
Likewise, man. Thanks for having me.